შექმნა ძალიან მრავალფეროვან საზოგადოებაში და მოგვიყვება თავისი გამოცდილების შესახებ. დიდი მადლობა რომ მოგწონდით.
Thank you. Of course, I didn't understand that one word. I was waiting for my social cue to begin the conversation. Again, I'm Robert Cooper from UCLA, a professor there in the Urban Schooling Division of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. It is certainly a delight and a pleasure to be here today and to be in Georgia. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself thus far, and I look forward to the weekend when I have a moment of time to do a little sightseeing and to enjoy all that you all have here in Georgia. So I'm going to speak just very briefly today and talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing at UCLA and some of the work that hopefully might influence how I am going to be helpful to some of the courses that I've been asked to assist with. So let me talk a little bit about kind of the focus of my research and put it in a context for you. So the focus of my work really is on creating conditions in schools so that every student can be successful. So hoping to identify what are the important factors in the school context that we can change, that we can modify, that we can alter in ways to bring about what we call in the States increased equity, increased access to high quality schooling. So equity is really about trying to create schools where every kid has the opportunity to be successful. And for us, in a U.S. context, that success in many ways is equivalent to being exposed to high quality schooling. Schooling that would lead them to have choices in life, choices about university life for the most part. Because what we do know in many democratic societies, education is the heart and soul of democracy. And so to the extent that every kid has the possibility to be a productive member of society and to participate in the democracy of that society is critically important. And so one of the things that we try to do is try to look at schools and look at how we can make them places of learning for all kids. Unfortunately, in the US, we have a system that is reflective of our history. And we have created a system that advantages certain students and disadvantages other students. And so part of this work is how do we bring about equality for all students in this context. And so as I look at my work, it's grounded in what we call critical race theory. And this is kind of the overarching theory for the work that I do. And this theory is really driven by these 5 tenets. And it is an attempt to put issues of race and racism at the forefront of the discussion. So it looks at the centrality and intersectionality of race and racism with this overlay of power. So looking really at the intersection of race, racism, and power and how those things play out in the context of schooling. And it's an attempt to really challenge the dominant ideology, some of the cultural assumptions and beliefs that kind of have built our educational system. So everything from the way that we organize schools to the ways in which we identify which classes ought to be taught to which kids, really challenging that dominant discourse about how to do that. We have a commitment to social justice. And, you know, social justice is one of those terms that is very nebulous. And how do you define social justice? And what does it mean? But one of the things that is important are the principles behind social justice. And those principles really are about fairness, it's about equity, it's about providing everybody with a sense of, let's just say, fairness, right? And how do we do that in the context of schools? And then the centrality of experimental knowledge. So it's really about trying to create new knowledge and knowledge and changing the discourse around what's important in schools. And it comes from this interdisciplinary perspective. Overlap with that particular theory is this theory of school change, if you will, and it comes out of the effective school literature. And it talks about the different dimensions of schooling. And if we are to fundamentally change the schooling process, there are these 4 dimensions that we have to pay attention to. The first we call the technical dimension. And those are school structures, school strategies, and school policies. And oftentimes this is where most of the work in our schools get done. These technical things. Why? Because they're easy to do, right? We know how to change policies. We know how to change strategies. We know how to change structures. But what we don't do well in the US is really challenge kind of the normative ideas and assumptions that undergird those structures. So, for example, we have a movement now to create what we call smaller schools. It's not uncommon in Los Angeles and to have schools as large high school of, say, 5,000 students. So you take 5,000 students in one building, it's very impersonal. So the movement is to make them smaller. But we simply make them smaller without paying attention to why we are making them smaller. We're making them smaller because we're trying to create personalized learning opportunities for students. We simply just divide the school up in 4 smaller schools, and we continue to do what we've always done. And so the kids who have had difficulty still have difficulty now in just a smaller school environment, because we haven't really questioned what are the norms and values that are important in the educational process, right? And how do we create those small learning environments? And then obviously this political dimension is critically important. It's about who gets to participate, how individuals participate, and when do they participate in the schooling process. So I take these 2 theories and overlap them and try then to understand the change process in schools. Now, let me give you a little context about where I work. So I want to give you a California context. So California, it's weird to talk about California in kind of this, in Georgia. But California is one of the 52 states there, and that's where UCLA is. And that's where most of the work that I do is located. And what you'll notice if you look at the trends in California is that the number of public school students has increased from 4 million to 6 million over the last 30 years. So part of our struggle and our challenge is that we are in California are being asked to educate more students, yet with no more resources. So some of our challenges are very similar to what you're being asked to do here in Georgia. Educate more students with less resources. Our second challenge is that our enrollment is changing. California is becoming a much more diverse state. So back in 1980, 30 years ago, we were approximately 56% white or Caucasian, and only about 25% Hispanic or Latino, and about 10% African American. But over a 30-year period, we have now become about 47% Hispanic and now 29% white. So what we have in the state of California is we have a majority of minority students that we are now trying to educate. And minority